Henderson's vintage emeralds. Vicky looks like a trapped animal. Her glamour is gone. Black mascara streaks down her panic-stricken cheeks, and her designer heels are kicked off in the corner. Suddenly, the chaotic alarm cuts to dead silence. A robotic voice echoes from the ceiling speakers. Intruder containment active. Vicky spins around, looking up at the observation deck. There, standing behind a wall of safety glass, is 10-year-old Leo Henderson. He isn't crying. He isn't scared. He's calmly tapping a glowing tablet, a cold smirk playing on his lips. She thought she was the predator, but in this smart house, she's just the prey. To understand how the predator ended up in a cage, we have to rewind exactly 6 hours. The afternoon sun was bouncing off the sleek, chromatic bumper of Vicky Vane's leased convertible as she crunched up the pristine gravel driveway of the Henderson estate. She wasn't looking at the architecture, which was a marvel of modern engineering. Cantilevered bedrooms and walls made entirely of smart glass. No, Vicky was looking at the dollar signs. She flipped down the visor, checking her teeth for lipstick stains, and whispered into her AirPods. "Babe, you wouldn't believe this place. It's not a house, it's a fortress made of money. The agency said they need a sitter for one night, but I'm thinking I might need a bonus before I leave." She let out a dry, cruel laugh, disconnected the call, and pasted a dazzling, practiced smile onto her face before stepping out onto the marble walkway. Inside, the atmosphere was chaotic but expensive. Mrs. Henderson was fluttering around the foyer like a nervous butterfly, clutching a strand of vintage pearls she couldn't decide whether to wear or lock away. "Leo, honey, are you listening to me?" she asked, her voice trembling with separation anxiety. In the corner, sunken into a massive leather armchair that swallowed his small frame, was Leo. To the untrained eye, he looked like a typical bored 10-year-old glued to his tablet. His messy brown hair fell over his eyes, and he wore a stained, oversized hoodie that made him look defenseless. But look closer. His eyes weren't tracking a video game character. They were scanning lines of code, scrolling through the live feed of the front gate camera where Vicky was currently checking her reflection in the glass. "I'm listening, Mom," Leo said, his voice flat, monotonous. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He had already run a background check on the license plate entering the driveway. Result: rental. Overdue. The doorbell chimed, a soft, melodic, synthetic sound that seemed to hum from the walls themselves. "That must be her." Mrs. Henderson rushed to the door, throwing it open to reveal Vicky. The transformation was instant. Vicky's posture softened, her eyes widened with faux innocence, and her voice pitched up an octave. "Mrs. Henderson, oh my gosh, this home is breathtaking, and you look stunning," Vicky gushed, "Sissy," stepping inside without waiting for an invite. Her eyes instantly darted to the pearls in Mrs. Henderson's hand, then to the diamond studs in her ears, calculating their pawn shop value in milliseconds. Jackpot. "Thank you, Vicky." "We're running so late," Mrs. Henderson said, breathless. She gestured toward the living room. "This is Leo. He's very self-sufficient. Just keep him fed and make sure he's in bed by 9. Vicky crouched down, ignoring the stiffness in her designer jeans, and waved at Leo with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Hey there, buddy. We're going to have so much fun. High five." Leo finally looked up. His gaze was unsettlingly direct for a child. He didn't smile. He didn't high-five her. He just stared at her for a beat too long, analyzing the micro-expressions of greed twitching at the corner of her mouth. "Hello, Vicky," he said simply, then looked back at his screen. Mrs. Henderson sighed, kissing the top of Leo's head. "The house is fully automated, Vicky. If you need anything, lights, locks, temperature, just use the wall panels. The safe with my collection is in the master study, but obviously that room is strictly off-limits." Vicky's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't even had to ask. The woman practically handed her the map. "Understood. Off-limits," Vicky chirped, crossing her fingers behind her back. As the heavy front door clicked shut behind the parents, the silence rushed back in. Vicky stood up, the smile sliding off her face like melting wax. She looked down at Leo with a cold sneer, her true self surfacing instantly. "All right, kid, listen close. I'm not here to play games.
Go to your room, stay on your iPad, and don't bother me. I have some house inspection to do." Leo didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just stood up, tucked his tablet under his arm, and walked toward the floating staircase. "Okay," Leo said softly.
"I'll be in my room." As he turned the corner out of sight, a small, knowing smirk crept onto his face. She thought she was dismissing him, but she was just giving him the time he needed to boot up the system. The moment the soft, hydraulic hiss of the upstairs bedroom door signaled Leo's departure, Vicky didn't just relax, she invaded. She kicked off her heels, leaving them haphazardly on the pristine Italian marble, and let out a groan of entitlement that echoed through the cavernous living room. The silence of the house was heavy, expectant, but Vicky was too absorbed in her own greed to feel the weight of the eyes watching her from the hidden camera lenses recessed into the crown molding. She pulled her phone from her back pocket, hitting record on a video message. "Okay, update," she whispered, panning the camera around the room, capturing the floor-to-ceiling windows and the shimmering crystal chandelier. "The parents are gone. The kid is a total mute weirdo, and I am currently standing in a room that costs more than my entire life. Look at this stuff, babe. It's disgusting how rich these people are." She ended the recording with a sneer, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Her eyes landed on the wet bar across the room, a sleek slab of obsidian stocked with amber liquids that glowed under the under-cabinet lighting. Vicky sauntered over, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor. She picked up a heavy crystal decanter, swirling the liquid inside. Without bothering to look for a glass, she took a swig straight from the bottle. The burn was smooth, aged, and expensive. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of red lipstick on her skin. "Not bad," she muttered aloud. "Needs ice, though." "That's a 50-year-old single malt scotch," a voice said from the shadows of the hallway. "My dad says putting ice in it is a crime against history." Vicky jumped, nearly dropping the heavy crystal. She spun around, her face twisting from startled fear to instant hot anger. Leo was standing there. He hadn't made a sound. He was still wearing that ridiculous oversized hoodie, his hands shoved deep into the pockets, staring at her with those unnerving, unblinking eyes. "Jesus," Vicky shrieked, clutching the bottle to her chest. "Do you know how to knock? Or do you just creep around like a little freak?" Leo didn't flinch at the insult. He simply adjusted his glasses. "I live here, Vicky. I came to get a glass of water. You didn't answer when I said excuse me." Vicky's eyes narrowed. She set the bottle down on the counter with a loud clack that threatened to chip the glass. She marched toward him, closing the distance until she was looming over him. She expected him to shrink back, to apologize, to act like the scared 10-year-old he was supposed to be. But Leo stood his ground, his breathing steady, his pulse visible on the biometric monitor on his wrist, completely flat. "Listen to me, you little spy," Vicky hissed, pointing a manicured finger in his face. "I am the adult here. I am in charge. If I want to drink the fancy paint thinner your daddy keeps in a bottle, I will, and you won't say a word. Do you understand?" Leo looked at her finger, then up at her eyes. "I understand," he said monotonously. "Good." Vicky smirked, feeling a rush of power. She looked down at the floor where she had kicked off her shoes. "Actually, since you're down here, be a dear and move my shoes to the side. I don't want to trip over them later." It was a test, a blatant, humiliating power play. Leo paused. In his mind, he was running a probability simulation. Compliance increases antagonists' confidence. Overconfidence leads to errors. Strategy. Submit. Slowly, Leo walked over to the discarded heels. He bent down, picked them up, and placed them neatly by the wall. He stood up and looked at her. "Is that all, Vicky?" Vicky laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Wow, trained well, aren't you? Yeah, that's all. Go back to your room, and if I catch you sneaking up on me again, I'm locking you in there." Leo turned and walked away, his face blank. But as he ascended the floating staircase, his fingers were tapping a rhythmic pattern against his thigh. Morse code. TARGETACQUIRED. Vicky waited until he was gone before turning her attention to the real prize. The master study, Mrs. Henderson, had practically drawn her a treasure map. She walked to the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The jewelry, the cash, the safe. She reached for the handle, gripping the cold brass. She turned it. It didn't budge. She jiggled it harder. Locked. "Damn it," she cursed under her breath. She leaned down, inspecting the lock mechanism. It wasn't a keyhole. It was a smooth black glass panel, a biometric scanner. "Of course," she spat. "Paranoid rich people." Frustration began to bubble up in her chest, hot and suffocating. She looked around the hallway, her eyes darting to the keypad on the wall. She tried a few obvious codes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Error. 0, 0, 0. Error. 6969. Error. Soft, polite, synthetic voice chimed from the ceiling speakers. "Access denied. 3 failed attempts will trigger a silent alarm." Vicky froze. Panic warred with greed. She couldn't trigger the alarm. She needed the code, and she knew exactly who might have it. She stormed up the stairs, no longer caring about noise. She didn't walk, she stomped, the vibrations of her anger shaking the sleek minimalism of the house. She reached Leo's door and threw it open without knocking. Leo was sitting at his desk, surrounded by 3 monitors. Screens of cascading green text and wireframe blueprints of the house reflected in his glasses. To Vicky, it just looked like a complicated video game. He didn't turn around. "Hey!" Vicky shouted, marching into the room. She grabbed the back of his swivel chair and spun him around violently. Leo's head whipped to the side, his glasses skewing on his nose. "You didn't tell me the study was locked with a fingerprint thing." Leo fixed his glasses, his expression one of confusion. "Mom said it was off limits. Why are you trying to go in there?" "Don't play dumb with me," Vicky screamed, her facade of the nice babysitter completely incinerated. She grabbed the collar of his hoodie, bunching the fabric in her fist. I need to get in there to check the windows, for safety. Now how do I open it? I don't know, Leo stammered, his voice trembling slightly. It was a perfect performance. Only Dad can open it. It scans his retina. Liar! Vicky shoved him back against the chair. She looked around the room, desperate for leverage. Her eyes landed on a glass case on his shelf containing a vintage circuit board mounted like a trophy. She grabbed it. This looks expensive. Is this important to you, nerd? Leo's eyes widened. Please don't. That's a prototype. My grandfather gave it to me. Then open the door. Vicky raised the glass case above her head, ready to smash it onto the hardwood floor. Open the study, or your little science project becomes trash. Count of 3. 1, 2. Okay. Okay, stop, Leo cried out, holding his hands up in surrender. I can bypass it. Just put it down. Vicky lowered the case slowly, a triumphant, cruel grin spreading across her face. She set it back on the shelf, patting it mockingly. See, was that so hard? You tech geeks are all the same. No spine. She grabbed Leo by the arm, her nails digging into his skin through the thick fabric of his hoodie. Let's go. March. She dragged him down the hallway like a prisoner. Leo stumbled, struggling to keep his footing, playing the part of the terrified victim to perfection. But inside his mind, the calculation was complete. Physical contact initiated, fingerprint residue captured on hoodie fabric. Aggression level 8-10, empathy level 0-10, trap sequence. Alpha is ready for deployment. They reached the mahogany doors. Vicky shoved Leo toward the scanner. Do your magic, Harry Potter. Open it. Leo sniffled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flat device that looked like a modified USB drive. He held it up to the scanner. I'm not supposed to do this. The house AI will log the entry. I don't care what the house logs, Vicky snapped, leaning over his shoulder, her breath hot and smelling of stolen scotch. Just open the damn door. Leo tapped the device against the glass panel. A moment of silence passed. Then the panel glowed green. A mechanical clunk echoed from inside the doorframe. System override accepted, the AI voice announced. Though Leo had secretly routed the audio command to sound compliant while the actual system log read, Intruder protocol initiated, containment mode, standby. Vicky gasped in delight. She pushed past Leo, hitting him with her shoulder hard enough to send him stumbling into the wall. Finally, she squealed. She threw the doors open. The study was magnificent, dark wood, leather, and in the corner a massive steel safe. Vicky didn't even look back at Leo. She was moth-drawn to a flame. Stay there, she commanded over her shoulder, stepping across the threshold. If you move 1 inch, I'll break everything in your room, understand? Leo slumped against the wall, rubbing his shoulder where she had shoved him. He looked small, defeated, and broken. I understand, he whispered, but as Vicky strutted into the trap, disappearing into the shadows of the study, Leo's posture instantly corrected. The fear vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold, hard glint of a predator who has just watched the prey walk into the cage. He lifted his wrist to his mouth, whispering into his smart watch. Phase 1 complete, Leo said softly. Activate Home Alone protocol. Lock the exits. Behind him, in the depths of the smart house's server room, the cooling fans whirred to life like the engines of a jet. The game had officially begun. Leo's finger hovered over the tablet hidden in his waistband, waiting for the satisfying click of the magnetic locks sealing Vicky inside the study. The heavy mahogany doors began to swing shut, driven by silent hydraulics. A smirk tugged at the corner of Leo's mouth. He had calculated the trajectory perfectly. She was trapped. But Leo had forgotten one variable in his equation, the safety protocols he had personally coded to prevent his little cousins from getting crushed during family gatherings. Just as the gap narrowed to a sliver, Vicky's stiletto heel jammed into the track. It was a desperate, flailing kick, but it was enough. The pressure sensors in the doorframe shrieked. "Obstruction detected," the AI voice chirped, sounding cheerfully oblivious to the disaster unfolding. "Engaging safety release." "No," Leo gasped, frantically tapping his smartwatch. "Override. Alpha protocol. Lock it." It was too late. The hydraulics hissed and reversed. The doors swung back open, revealing Vicky standing there. She wasn't just angry, she was terrifying. Her hair was disheveled, her chest heaving, and the look in her eyes wasn't greedy anymore. It was predatory. "You little rat," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Before Leo could sprint toward the hidden passage in the hallway, Vicky lunged. She was faster than he anticipated. Her hand clamped around his forearm, her grip like a steel vice. Yanking him off his feet, he slammed into the floor, the breath knocked out of him. The tablet skittered across the marble, sliding out of reach. "You think you're smart?" Vicky screamed, hauling him up by the front of his shirt. She shoved him backward, pinning him against the wall hard enough to rattle the framed photos. "You think this is a video game?" Leo struggled, kicking his legs, but he was 10 years old. Against a desperate adult, his intellect was useless in a physical brawl. Vicky spotted the smartwatch flashing red on his wrist, his lifeline to the house system. "No, please," Leo cried out, for real this time. Vicky ripped the watch from his wrist, the rubber strap snapping with a sharp pop. She threw it onto the hardwood floor and stomped on it with her heel. Crunch. The glass shattered. The glowing interface flickered and died. Leo stared at the broken shards. He felt a cold pit open in his stomach. He was offline. Totally, completely offline. "Now," Vicky panted, dragging him by the ear back into the study. "You're going to open that safe, and if you try any more Home Alone tricks, I won't just break your toys, I'll break you." She shoved him toward the steel safe. Leo's hands shook uncontrollably. Without his overrides, without his confidence, he was just a terrified child. He punched in the manual code, his birthday. The heavy tumblers clicked. The door swung open. Vicky pushed him aside and gasped. Inside lay the velvet boxes containing Mrs. Henderson's vintage collection. She grabbed the centerpiece, the eternal heart sapphire necklace. It was the one thing his mother had explicitly told him never to touch. The one thing she loved more than any object in the world. "Jackpot," Vicky whispered. She shoved the jewelry into her purse. Then she turned to Leo, who was huddled in the corner, clutching his bruised arm. She grabbed a roll of duct tape from the desk drawer, left over from his dad's packing, and roughly bound Leo's wrists to the arms of the heavy oak chair. She ripped a piece off and slapped it over his mouth. "Look at you," she mocked, leaning close, her eyes devoid of warmth. "Not so genius now, are you? You're just a little boy playing pretend." She turned and strutted out, grabbing his shattered tablet on the way. The heavy doors were left wide open. Leo sat frozen, the silence of the big house pressing down on him. Tears, hot, stinging, and real, spilled over his cheeks. He had failed. The house was compromised, his mother's treasure was gone, and he was trapped in the very room he tried to weaponize. The silence in the study was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic thudding of Leo's heart against his ribs. The duct tape over his mouth tasted of industrial adhesive and dust. His arms ached, twisted awkwardly behind him, bound to the chair. For a moment, he just sat there, the tears drying on his cheeks, listening to the confident clack, clack, clack of Vicky's heels fading down the hallway. She was heading for the front door. She had won, or so she thought. Leo sniffled, blinking away the last of the moisture. His eyes shifted to the open safe. The emptiness where the necklace used to be seemed to mock him, but then a subtle, almost imperceptible sound cut through the gloom. A soft whirring from the wall panel behind the safe. Leo's panic began to recede, replaced by the cold, analytical calm that made him a prodigy. He hadn't just typed in his birthday because he was scared. He had typed in his birthday because, 3 years ago, he had programmed that specific sequence into the house's kernel level. It was a duress beacon. In the foyer, Vicky felt like she was floating. The weight of the platinum and sapphire necklace in her purse was heavy, promising a payout that would clear her debts and fund a lifestyle she felt she deserved. She caught her reflection in the grand hallway mirror, hair slightly messy, lipstick smudged, but triumphant. "Too easy," she muttered, reaching for the brass handle of the massive double doors. "Rich kids are so soft." She turned the handle and pushed. The door didn't move. She frowned, shoving harder. It was like pushing against a solid wall. She rattled the handle. Locked. "What the?" She twisted the deadbolt thumb turn. It spun freely, disconnected from the mechanism. Suddenly, the crystal chandelier above her flickered. The warm, welcoming amber light shifted instantly to a harsh, clinical crimson. The ambient music system, which usually played soft jazz, cut out. A robotic, authoritative voice boomed from the hidden ceiling speakers, loud enough to vibrate the floorboards. "Perimeter breached. Lockdown protocol theta initiated. Authorities have been dispatched. Please remain where you are." Vicky's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her chest. She spun around, looking for a side exit, but heavy steel shutters were already descending over the floor-to-ceiling windows with a terrifying mechanical hiss. Clang, clang, clang. The house was sealing itself. She was a rat in a very expensive cage. Then came the sirens. Not the distant wail of city traffic, but the piercing, immediate yelp of police cruisers pulling into the driveway. Blue and red lights washed through the fanlight window above the door, painting Vicky's terrified face in alternating strokes of bruise-colored light. Before she could even process a lie, the electronic locks on the front door disengaged with a loud thunk. The doors flew open, but it wasn't just the police. Mrs. Henderson stood there, flanked by 2 armed officers. She wasn't the flighty, anxious woman Vicky had met earlier. She looked furious, a mother bear ready to tear the world apart. "Vicky!" Mrs. Henderson screamed, rushing past the officers into the foyer. Vicky's survival instincts kicked in. She immediately dropped her purse and threw her hands up, forcing tears into her eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Henderson, thank God," she sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured hysteria. "It was Leo. He went crazy. He locked me in here. He tried to hurt me. I was just trying to escape to get help." Mrs. Henderson didn't stop. She didn't even look at Vicky. She sprinted past the weeping babysitter straight toward the study. "Leo, Leo!" Vicky blinked, the act faltering. An officer stepped in front of her, his hand resting on his holster. "Stay right there, Ma'am." Moments later, Mrs. Henderson emerged from the hallway, supporting a pale but freed Leo. She had ripped the tape off his mouth and cut the bindings. Leo was rubbing his wrists, his face grim. When he saw Vicky, he didn't cower. He stood straighter. "He trapped me," Vicky shrieked again, pointing a trembling finger at the 10-year-old. "He's dangerous. Look at my purse. He put the jewelry in there to frame me." Mrs. Henderson stopped in the middle of the foyer. She slowly turned to face Vicky. The look of pure disgust on her face made Vicky's blood run cold. Mrs. Henderson reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen and held it up. On the screen was a crystal-clear, high-definition video feed. It showed the study. It showed Vicky slapping the tape over Leo's mouth. It showed her mocking him. It showed her stuffing the necklace into her bag. "We saw everything," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice shaking with rage. The moment Leo entered the distress code into the safe, the house went into silent witness mode. It started live streaming directly to my phone and the local police precinct. "We watched you threaten my son in 4K resolution." Vicky's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The air left her lungs. Leo stepped forward, his voice scratchy but steady. "You thought the code was just for the lock," he said, looking at her with a maturity far beyond his years. "But in this house, data is worth more than diamonds. Entering my birthday triggers a hostage alert. It disables the local alarm so you don't panic, but it locks the perimeter instantly once you try to leave." One of the officers stepped forward, grabbing Vicky's wrist and spinning her around. The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. "Victoria Vane," the officer recited, "you are under arrest for attempted grand larceny, child endangerment, and kidnapping." As they dragged her toward the door, Vicky began to struggle, her composure shattering completely. Wait, I'm sorry, I just needed the money. That necklace is worth millions. I'll give it back." Leo let out a short, dry laugh. He walked over to where her purse had fallen and nudged it with his sneaker. "Actually," Leo said, a small, triumphant smirk returning to his face, "that's the other thing. Never keeps the eternal heart in the house. The insurance premiums are too high." Mrs. Henderson nodded, crossing her arms. "That piece in your bag, it's a cubic zirconia replica we keep for display. It's worth about $40 on Amazon." Vicky froze, half out the door. The color drained from her face completely. She had assaulted a child, faced a felony charge, and ruined her entire life for a piece of costume jewelry. "Get her out of here," Mrs. Henderson commanded. As the police shoved Vicky into the back of the cruiser, the neighbors, awakened by the lights, stood on their porches, phones out, recording the glamorous Vicky Vane being hauled away like common trash. Leo stood in the doorway, his mother's hand on his shoulder. He looked down at his broken smartwatch on the floor, then up at the flashing lights. He was offline, he was bruised, but the system had worked. "Nice try," Leo whispered into the night air. "But nobody hacks the Hendersons." As the red and blue sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the hum of the cooling police cruiser engines, a heavy silence settled back over the Henderson estate. Mrs. Henderson knelt on the cold marble floor, pulling Leo into a hug so tight it almost hurt. In that moment, the ultra-modern smart home didn't matter. The millions of dollars didn't matter. She wasn't a wealthy socialite. She was just a mother who had almost lost her world. "I'm so sorry, Leo," she whispered, her tears soaking into his t-shirt. "I looked at her references. I thought she was perfect." Leo hugged her back, resting his chin on her shoulder. He looked at the empty spot where Vicky had stood, a place where arrogance had been shattered by intelligence. "She looked perfect, Mom," Leo replied, his voice calm. "But bugs always hide deep in the code. You just have to know where to look." Vicky Vane made the fatal mistake that destroys so many people. She let greed write her narrative. She looked at a 10-year-old boy and saw a helpless victim. She looked at a glittering necklace and saw a ticket to paradise. Her arrogance created a blind spot so massive that she missed the truth staring her in the face. She was so busy planning how to spend the money that she didn't realize she was walking into a trap of her own making. She traded her freedom, her reputation, and her entire future for a $40 piece of glass, all because she judged a book by its cover. She assumed that power comes from size and age, failing to realize that the most dangerous weapon is a sharp mind. So remember, never underestimate someone based on how they look, and never let greed blind you to the consequences of your actions. Because when you try to cheat the system, life has a funny way of crashing your program.